When it comes to talking about the conditions of slavery, we're talking about two things. One, we're talking about the unbelievably awful, inhumane conditions in which Africans were kept enslaved, and also their resilience to this situation and to their enslavement. The second thing, which often isn't mentioned, is the dehumanization of the oppressor. How does an individual give up their humanity and give up their moral high standing so much that they sink to such a low level that they're willing to cause so much harm to a people purely for their own profit? Which part of them has to die inside to enable them to do that to someone else? The conditions of slavery can be thought of as what happens when one set of humans believe that another set of humans are subhuman. This should serve as a lesson to us all. There are common examples of this which we encounter today, and which should provide a warning to us as to what can come after this. For example, Katie Hopkins described migrants or refugees as cockroaches. Why did she choose the term cockroaches? When we think of cockroaches, we think of pests, we think of things that need to be exterminated. Hitler used pesticides to kill the Jews and described them as rats. It wasn't enough just to describe them as rats or pests. He actually used pesticides to kill them in the millions. 6 million Jews died during World War II as a result of genocide. Nazis described Jews as Untermenschen, which translates into subhuman. Sailor Winston Mano described Africans as beasts who have no houses, and also as people without heads, having their mouths and their eyes in their breasts. These were rumours that, or let's say propaganda, that this individual spread to justify the dehumanisation of Africans. David Livingstone Smith from the Institute of Cognitive Science and Evolutionary Psychology at the University of New England explains why this is. Quote, "We all know, despite what we see in the movies, it's very difficult psychologically to kill another human being up close and in cold blood, or to inflict atrocities on them. So when it does happen, it can be helpful to understand what it is that allows human beings to overcome the very deep natural inhibitions that they have against treating other people like game animals or vermin or dangerous predators." As author and rapper Kingsley Daly, aka Akala, said, "As soon as you call a group of people cockroaches, it is a mandate for murder." So what we're basically talking about here is an individual having to convince themselves to do harm. They're having to override their own innate humanity to do harm to another individual. How else would a Christian, Muslim or Jew enslave a fellow human when they have such strict religious doctrines to treat, for example, your neighbour as you would like to be treated yourself? These individuals have to make the person who they're oppressing subhuman in their own perspective and in the perspective of others, and they can do so via the use of propaganda. The conditions in which the Africans were transported and enslaved were horrendous. They would have had their feet and hands shackled, often in a forward flexed position. Many slaves thought that the Europeans taking them were cannibals, making the wine they drank from the blood of the Africans. Suicide amongst the enslaved Africans was rife. Many jumped overboard to save themselves from a life of enslavement or cannibalism. Around 1/3 of Africans died in the crossing to the Americas, which often took as long as 3 months. The Africans were often disfigured when they arrived due to being chained in abnormal positions for such long periods of time. For example, chained in a flexed forward position with your hands chained to your ankles. The smell on the ships was so awful that people claimed to be able to smell the slave ships before they saw them. John Newton, the conditions of the John Newton and his I suppose, what would it be? John Newton and his exposure to the conditions of the slave ship inspired him as a slave trader to become an abolitionist. He later wrote the hymn Amazing Grace. On arrival, the slavers beat the Africans into submission. So this is on arrival in the Americas, they forced the Africans to change their names to the names of their owners and abandon their religion. So for example, my family names might be Curry, Reed, Simpson, Pierce, Rochester. These are the names of the individuals who owned my ancestors. These are not names which have been acquired through natural progression or marriage. It is estimated that at least 1/3 of the Africans worshipped in accordance to Islam before their capture. The rest worshipped traditional African deities. They were forced to convert to Christianity and were provided a Bible with verses such as Exodus removed. This was to prevent them from drawing inspiration from other biblical people who had fought their oppressor. So we all know that in Exodus we see Moses defying the Pharaoh and leading his people out of Egypt and out of slavery. The slave owners did not want the Africans reading the same scripture, so they removed it from the Bible. Cyril Lionel Robert James, in his book The Black Jacobins, describes some of the punishments that the Africans had to endure. Pregnant women had their babies cut out of their wombs. Heels of runaway slaves were removed. Runaway slaves, or slaves who were particularly objectionable or unruly, were slow cooked on an open fire whilst being alive. Gunpowder was inserted into their rectums and set alight. Rape of female slaves by their masters was commonplace. The slavers' initials were branded onto the African skin with a hot poker. Whipping and beating until death are also commonplace. I have family members who have been recorded to have had 500 lashes to the back. Slave collars prevented the individuals, the enslaved Africans, from resting. Lynchings, i.e. hanging from trees by the neck, was commonplace. The average age of the Africans taken to the Americas was a mere 15 years of age. However, did you know that despite being held in unimaginably horrific conditions, many of our modern innovations come from enslaved Africans? One, for example, is the vaccine. An African slave named Onesimus explained to his slaver how he had been protected from smallpox by rubbing the pus of an infected person into an open wound. This later gave rise to the concept of vaccination, giving a low dose of a pathogen to promote immunity. My task for you is to name as many black celebrities that you know. What are their last names? Explain why their last names aren't authentically African or Arabic, as is commonplace in Muslim countries. What does this tell you of their ancestors' past? What does this tell you about the size of the slave trade? Another task which I want you to partake in is another example of great evil is the Holocaust of Jews by the Nazis. 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis in unimaginable conditions. They lost 2/3 of their population to genocide. What do you think would have happened if these Jews were also forced to forget who they were as well as this? In what state would this leave the people? I.e., once you remove the religious practice of Judaism from the Jews, what would happen to that Jewish population? Answer this and you have a similar idea as what has happened to the West African diaspora. Feel free to talk about this and discuss under guidance of your teacher, and when you're ready we can continue with the rest of the presentation.